In the spring of 1943, rain pounded the thin roof of a tech tent at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Inside, cables snaked across the wet ground. Tables were covered with radio parts and batteries, and the air smelled of soldered wires. A young engineer, Lieutenant Harold B. Greer from the U.S. Army Signal Corps, was hunched over a map, his hands greasy. "If we put microphones here," he said, pointing to small black dots marking a trench line, "we can hear the enemy's artillery and figure out where they are by how long it takes the sound to reach each one." An older officer, a North Africa vet, laughed. "Sound. We don't fight wars with our ears, son. The enemy won't wait for you to listen." The tent filled with laughter. They rejected the young man's idea, calling his report impractical and not ready for the field. Greer didn't say anything. Outside, thunder sounded like faraway gunfire. He stood at the tent entrance, watching the rain, each drop making ripples and puddles. Every hit was a sound wave, every echo a coordinate. He realized the battlefield was already talking. People just didn't know how to listen. That night, after everyone else was asleep, Greer went back to his table. He hooked up microphones to a simple timer, measuring how long it took sound to travel 20 meters across the wet ground. He wrote numbers in his notebook. Temperature, 20 degrees. Sound delay 0.059 seconds. Maybe we can triangulate. A truck backfired outside, and he quickly looked at the stopwatch. His hand shook. He wasn't building a weapon. He was building a way to sense things, an artificial ear for war. "If I can hear them first," he whispered, "maybe we live." At dawn, the officers found Greer still there, surrounded by wires, his uniform soaked. No one laughed this time. The storm had gone, and the faint sounds of practice shells rolled through the gray sky. Every explosion had a source, waiting to be found. In war, he wrote in his journal, "No idea is dumb if it saves a life." Across Europe in 1943 and 1944, American artillery crews fought without seeing. When enemy shells fell, they couldn't see where they came from, just flashes on distant ridges, too quick and too far to track. They guessed where to shoot back. Every map had question marks. Every barrage was a gamble. One foggy dawn in the Italian hills, Captain Joseph McNair's battery fired 30 rounds toward a valley where they thought Germans were hiding. Nothing shot back, just silence. "We're fighting ghosts again," a corporal said, spitting into the mud. Shells often hit farms, empty fields, or woods the enemy had left long ago. Reports from the front kept saying the same thing. "Counterfire not good because we can't see." In some divisions, enemy guns caused over a fourth of artillery casualties. Harold Greer saw how hopeless things were during his field visits. He walked among men who slept by their guns, their faces tired. He watched them look into the smoke, trying to find something they couldn't. "You can't hit what you can't see," a gunner said, cleaning his weapon with shaky hands. Greer just nodded. He knew that was killing them, one battle at a time. He spent the following nights drawing, figuring out sound speeds at different humidity levels, and testing how the land changed echoes. Soldiers joked that he was trying to hear through the earth. He didn't mind. In his notes, he wrote, "A shell scream has a source. Follow it back, and you find the enemy." During an exercise near Natuno, he told a sergeant to count the seconds between flash and hit. The delay was 4.5 seconds. Greer whispered a number, walked 50 paces, and put down a marker. Hours later, when scouts came back, they confirmed it. A German gun pit was less than 30 yards from his guess. The officers still weren't sure, calling it luck. But the men who had lived through the blind barrages started to believe. "Maybe he's right," Sergeant Riley wrote in his diary. "Maybe we don't need eyes. Maybe ears will do." Every night, Greer sat by his gear, listening to the sound of distant guns across the valleys. Each boom was a clue, a coordinate, a chance to turn fear into knowing where to shoot. When eyes didn't work, he thought, ears could still see. Night came to the testing ground near Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. Rain came in waves, steady and cold, hitting crates of gear on the muddy ground. Floodlights flickered. A few engineers worked without talking, their boots sinking into the ground. Greer was one of them, his uniform soaked and covered in mud. He was laying cables, hundreds of meters of them, across the field, connecting microphones one by one. Each spot had to be exactly measured, each cable pinned to a steel stake. He had no weapon, just a spade, a hammer, and his notes in a plastic bag. "You really think you'll hear a gun 10 kilometers away?" A sergeant asked, yelling over the wind. Greer didn't answer, just counted seconds under his breath. When the last wire was buried, he crouched by a wooden box, a timing unit the size of a small radio. He hooked up the wires, turned the knobs, and waited. A green line hummed on the small glass screen of the oscilloscope. The field was empty. No one spoke. Then, in the distance, a flash. A moment later, the ground shook. The green line jumped. Greer's heart pounded. He wrote down the delay, for 0.27 seconds. Then he ran to the next station, compared the time, and drew 2 lines on the map. The lines crossed at a spot on the far ridge. "Mark that spot," he shouted. "That's where they fired." The other engineers hesitated, wet and cold. Then came a second explosion, closer this time. The oscilloscope jumped again, and the lines matched perfectly. "We got it," Greer said. No one moved for a moment. Then, as they understood, one man patted him on the back. The others followed, laughter mixing with the rain. What had been a joke a month ago now seemed like a miracle. That night, at 0210 hours, Greer's note said, "First confirmed detection. Distance 9.6 kilometers. Error less than 100 m. It works." Mud dripped from his sleeve as he closed the notebook. For the first time in months, he smiled. In the middle of a storm, soaked to the bone, one man had given the American Army a new sense, the ability to hear through darkness. By early 1944, sound plots from Greer's system spread through artillery units in England, getting ready for D-Day. In a canvas command post near Portsmouth, maps covered tables under dim red lights. Pencil circles overlapped like ripples, each showing a time delay from a different microphone. Where the circles crossed was where the enemy was firing. Greer stood by Captain Riley, explaining how it worked. "Each sound has its own signature," he said, tapping the chart. "The farther the microphone, the longer the delay. Plot 3, in the intersection gives the gun's position within 50 m. Riley looked at the lines. "And you can do that faster than a spotter plane?" "Faster than smoke clears," Greer said. When the invasion came, the real test arrived. On June 9, 1944, near Corentin, German 88s fired on the 83rd Infantry Division's roads. Shells landed among convoys, setting trucks on fire and wounding people. The air was full of dust and fear. Then, from a small trailer hidden behind hedgerows, Greer's device came alive. Operators listened through static, watching the needles flicker. Reading 1, delay 2.7 seconds. Reading 2, 3.1 seconds. Reading 3, 2.9. Within 40 seconds, the coordinates were on the map. Riley ordered, range 7,200 yards. Fire for effect. 6 American howitzers turned toward the ridge. The first volley landed. Moments later, orange burst from the enemy line, a direct hit. The German fire stopped. Greer's face was pale, but calm. "That's them," he said. In his log, he wrote, "Enemy battery stopped. Time to find, 47 seconds. Word spread fast. Soldiers now called that dumb science project a legend. The sound sections got new names, field artillery sound and flash battalions, with better gear and radar. Each unit covered a 10-mile front, plotting up to 40 enemy guns a day. Their work surprised even the top officers. One general wrote, "Math now kills faster than gunpowder." Around the fire, a sergeant joked, "So the pencil pushers finally saved us." But he wasn't joking, just thankful. That night, as shells stopped falling over Corentin, Greer stood by his tent, listening not to cheers, but to the strange quiet after destruction. The lines on his map had turned into real lives saved, invisible links between science and survival. By fall 1944, the U.S. Army made sound ranging a formal thing, creating special sections. Their operators, math people, engineers, radio guys, and gunners, carried microphones instead of rifles. They lived behind the lines, often unseen, listening for the sound of distant guns. They were soon called the listeners. Every night, when things got quiet, they unrolled wires through forests and fields, sometimes under fire. They planted the microphones like seeds, connected to a central post with oscilloscopes, amplifiers, and logbooks. They really were the Army's ears. Private Arthur Neal, who joined the 33rd Sound Ranging Battalion near Nancy, France, wrote home, "We don't see the war, we hear it. Every battery has its own voice. You can tell an 88 from a 105 by the sound. It's weird." You start to know them like people in the dark. Each sound became a pattern, a signature. Operators learned to tell them apart without thinking. The sharp sound of German field guns, the heavy sound of railway artillery, the hollow sound of mortars in valleys. They marked their findings on clear film, drawing lines that met it where the next strike would come from. When the Battle of the Bulge started in December, the Ardennes was covered in snow. You couldn't see anything. Planes couldn't fly. But the sound section stayed up, wrapped in blankets by humming generators. Their instruments glowed green in the dark. They could hear what no one could see. One night, a captain ran in, shouting, "They're shelling our right. We need coordinates." Within a minute, 3 operators had found the location. Counterfire came in minutes. The shelling stopped. The captain looked at them like they were magicians. Reports from that winter showed that counter-battery work went up by nearly 70% in areas with sound ranging and radar. For the first time, American gunners weren't firing blind. Greer, now a major, visited the Ardennes front in January 1945. He watched his old devices in action, now small, mobile, and better. He smiled as he read the new name on the trailer, Earth Ear. To him, it was more than just a thing. It was proof that listening could be as deadly as firing. That night, he wrote, "We've stopped listening just to live. We're listening to understand. Every sound tells us we're not going to die." The snow fell harder, covering the microphones. Under them, the earth still hummed, and the listeners waited for the next sound. By early 1945, as Germany started to lose, that idea had become a secret network. What started with Greer's wires now linked radar, sound, and even planes into one hunting system. But with the success came a new fight, not in the mud, but in labs and offices. In Washington, Signal Corps people argued over who deserved credit. British engineers said they had invented sound ranging first. American physicists showed logs proving Greer's work came before the Allied project. Reports piled up, marked confidential, duplicate, unverified. The quiet engineer whose idea had saved thousands was barely mentioned. Meanwhile, in Europe, the men using his system didn't care about politics. They just called them Greer's ears. Soldiers wrote home about how the gear turned their fear into control. Sergeant Henry Walsh wrote on a C-ration box, "Every time I see that screen light up, I think of the man who made it. Tell him thanks." Back home, newspaper people struggled to write about the tech without breaking the rules. One article hinted, "New U.S. system finds enemy guns before they fire." It didn't say how. Greer didn't care. The men were what mattered. During a field visit near Trier, he found one of his old devices. Wires frayed, casing dented, the nameplate worn away. The operator saluted and said, "Sir, this one's got 20 confirmed kills." Greer put his hand on the muddy box and whispered, "She's done her job." Rivalries between labs, missed patents, arguments over money. One colonel accused Greer's team of stealing radar stuff. Another said he slowed down research. None of it mattered to the families of soldiers who came home because of his machine. When the final push toward the Rhine began, over 60 sound ranging stations were working across Europe, using radar and sound together. They turned blind gunners into hunters, cutting enemy artillery by almost half. Greer got a small thank you. No party, no photos, just a letter thanking him for his help. He kept it in his diary until the end of the war. He wrote one last line, "Every life saved is worth 100 arguments." In April 1945, the Rhine was crossed. The German guns went silent, and silence, something soldiers didn't know, returned to Europe. For Major Harold Greer, it was both a win and a goodbye. He stood on a hill near Remagen, looking at a valley that had shaken every night with artillery. Now there was only wind. His gear was still set up, a beat-up oscilloscope, a microphone buried in mud, wires trailing through the fog. The same gear that once carried the battle's heartbeat now heard nothing. Greer knelt, wiped off the dirt, and listened. "Do you hear that?" he asked a corporal. The soldier frowned. "I don't hear anything, sir." Greer smiled. "Exactly. That's the best sound." He wrote in his notebook for the last time, "Enemy batteries silent. Our section disbanded. It feels strange to win by hearing nothing." Technicians packed gear into crates headed for the States. Some would end up in universities, others in Cold War labs. New radar would come from Greer's microphones and dials, the SCR-584 anti-aircraft systems, and counter-mortar sensors in Korea and Vietnam. The innovation that started in a muddy tent would reach space surveillance. But for now, the engineer who once stood alone in the rain felt small in the silence he had helped create. He walked past rows of German 88s, their barrels still. He stopped and put his hand on the cold steel. "You taught me how to listen," he whispered. "Now you've finally gone quiet." As dusk settled, the last truck rumbled away, leaving him alone. The breeze carried the hum of insects, the first peaceful sound in years. He closed his eyes, letting the wind wash over him. When peace came in May, his invention was just a paragraph in a report. There were no medals, no headlines. But thousands of men slept that night without hearing a shell. Sometimes victory isn't the sound of guns. It's the long silence that follows, the silence men fought for. When the guns went quiet in 1945, the world forgot Harold B. Greer. History remembers those who lead armies, not those who command silence. Yet, in a century of explosions, his legacy was measured not in noise, but in lives saved. Years later, Arthur Neal went home to Kansas. On quiet nights, he still heard echoes, not of battle, but of the earth's rhythm. He told his grandson, every boom had a story, every silence had a cost. The boy never understood, but he remembered how his grandfather paused before speaking, as if listening for something deep inside the earth. In a report from 1947, the Army said sound locations saved about 15,000 American lives during the European War. It was just a statistic buried among pages, one that spoke of fear, precision, and the brilliance of a man once laughed at for thinking war could be heard like music. Greer left the service, teaching engineering at a small college in Ohio. He rarely spoke of the war. Students remembered him as kind but distant, a man who sometimes stopped talking, listening to the hum of machines as if he'd heard worse. In his last letter, he wrote, "Every invention starts as an argument, but if it helps one soldier come home, it's worth all the laughter." Today, his methods are everywhere, in weather radar, submarine sonar, and sensors that protect cities. The idea that found German guns in the rain now maps earthquakes and tracks storms. Harold Greer's story isn't about fame. It's about how a persistent idea, that listening can be stronger than shouting and that patience can beat chaos, can lead to true victory. Somewhere, maybe there's an old microphone under European soil, rusted and forgotten. It no longer hears war, only